So this past weekend, I went and saw Violent Night, and I have some thoughts. I I had a conversation with my wife because I went and saw it with my wife, and it became clear pretty much immediately that the things I had to say about the movie weren't going to be interesting to her, which is fine. Our brains, when it comes to watching TV and movies and stuff like that, our brains kind of operate on different axes in terms of how we enjoy things, how we process things, and stuff like that. Certain types of films, she has a lot more to say about. This one, I think, distracted her with just how much violence and swearing there was in it. So I can understand her not having a lot to say about it from that perspective. I feel like she was kind of fighting internally because she spent most of the climax with her eyes closed. Hard to really give a movie an enthusiastic thumbs up if you can't watch a good portion of the best part of the movie. That being said, my spoiler free review of Violent Night is, as I mentioned, it's got a lot of very gory violence, a lot of swearing. But I think that if you can move past that, it's a good movie. It does some things really well, and it does other things not that great. But I think the things it does really well overshadow the things that it does not that great. And if you're a fan of either, slasher movies or action movies and you can handle blood, then I think this movie's for you. So from this point on, I'm going to start spoiling things. So if you're not interested in hearing spoilers, go ahead and click off. So Violent Night features Santa Claus as the main hero of the film. The film starts out with Santa getting drunk on Christmas Eve, and then he goes off to, do the whole round the world in one night thing. And he gets stopped at this one house. Now, you find out that this house is the house of an extremely rich woman with a son and a daughter and two grandkids. The son is probably the closest thing to a main character this movie has. He's the primary focus for the majority of the setting up part of the movie. It's weird because for the first 2/3 of the film, there's hardly any real violence. I was really wondering, when does the violent come into this movie called Violent Night? And so I was interested to see when things would pick up in terms of the violence. And what's interesting is that once it gets to the climax, the violence just kicks in full force. People are dying left and right, and it's some gruesome deaths. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The main character, the son, is sick of his mom's crap and doesn't want to be under her thumb anymore because he spent his entire life trying to kiss up to her so that he can hopefully, get some level of inheritance from her, be handed the reins, so to speak, for whatever nebulous company she happens to operate. And so this daughter is still very much in mooch mode for pretty much the entirety of the film. She is obnoxious, and she has a husband that is dumb as a sack of rocks. He is so stupid. But he's like a himbo. He's hot, but he's dumb, right? And they have a kid who's an influencer, a TikToker or a streamer. I'm not sure which. He's streaming the entire time, but he's doing it vertically. So it's I'm not really sure what his deal is for the most part. I think he's just kind of an all-encompassing, this is an influencer type guy. And for the most part, he's really annoying. But his whole influencer shtick starts to get kind of funny near the end of the film. And there's a mid-credit scene that kind of pays off the whole he's an influencer thing. It's pretty funny. That being said, the ex-wife, because they're separated, the ex-wife of the main character, the son, brings her daughter. They meet up. It's clear that they're divorced or whatever. and it's the daughter makes some wish about wishing that her parents would get back together, like every divorced kid says in these movies. And you know, right around the time where everyone in the family is sitting in the den, you know, the mom is having the Christmas party catered or whatever, you find out that the catering team are the villains. They're kind of like, they've infiltrated her house, and they've come like heavily armed, and this guy comes in calling himself Scrooge as his code name, because all the villains have these weird Christmas themed code names. And the guy hates Christmas, and that's kind of his shtick as the villain. I guess primarily his shtick is that he kind of like has outsmarted the mom at every turn, to the point where her extraction team has been paid off by this guy. Like, he's promised them a cut of the money they're stealing if they betray the mom, which is wild. And Santa just shows up to this house, and he finds out that it's being raided by these people, and he tries to get the hell out. Like, he's not interested in staying and sticking around. It isn't until his powers start to dwindle because he's drunk off his ass and had way too many cookies that, you know, he starts to find himself in a bit of a sticky wicket, as it were. And one of the villains starts shooting through the ceiling and scares the reindeer off. So he has no way to get out, and his powers are just kind of like not really doing what they're supposed to be doing. He's kind of having like, I don't know, performance anxiety. I don't remember. It happens to like 1 in 5 men or something like that. But you know, he's there. Come to find out, he's like an old barbarian from like 1200 years ago or something like that, who held like this big like sledgehammer looking thing and would just like crush people's skulls. And of course his weapon was called the Skull Crusher. And he gave up that life to become Santa Claus. How? Why? Who knows? They don't really do a good job of explaining it. I can appreciate the fact that they had to make Santa some kind of like violent character in order to make the events of this movie make sense. To make it make sense that he has the capabilities of doing the things that he's doing. I think that they could have gone a different route with it maybe, but whatever. I mean, it's not a problem. It's just something that I think maybe could have gone a couple more times across the cutting room floor. But I think that once the violence kicks in, things start to ramp up fast. He impales a guy on an icicle. He stabs a guy in the eye with a tree topper star, and then plugs the tree topper star in and like shocks the guy, and his face lights on fire. He steals a gun, doesn't do anything with it, hands it off to one of the other characters, and then finds a sledgehammer in the shed and just starts just absolutely demolishing people. I don't remember if he actually crushes any skulls. He might do 1 or 2. But for the most part, he just hits them real hard and they just kind of die, I guess. That or they're unconscious. I'm not really sure. And then at one point, he blows up the shed full of people. And while all this is happening, you know, the whole reveal of like, oh, the extraction team has turned against the mom, and Santa like pulls out his naughty list and sees that all the people on the extraction team are on the naughty list, which is like a visual cue to the audience that they're not good people and shouldn't be trusted. And you know, that's interesting, but it could have been done solely to prove the point. But they do 2 other things. Firstly, the leader of the extraction team just kills the dumb husband. The himbo just absolutely gets demolished. Like he just empties a clip into him. And then Santa sees them all on the naughty list, which is like, well, of course they're on the naughty list. They killed one of the members of the family. They're not here to help, obviously. And then they walk in and they just say, hey, we've turned our back on you because this guy offered us a ton of money. And it's like, they almost did a really good show don't tell. I understand that you kind of have to like make it obvious that the mom knows that the extraction team isn't on her side anymore, but you very easily could have just like had them walk in and her be like, and not give like a verbal confirmation that she knows, just have it be like implied that she knows. As the movie progresses, they become aware that Santa's around. He's kind of like killing people off. The daughter of the main character is like obsessed with Home Alone, and she like has a legit Home Alone moment. But unlike Home Alone, where the characters undergo all of this extreme torture and never die from things that should have killed them, the characters undergo extreme torture and do actually die of the things that should kill them. One guy has like a nail stuck through his, like the bottom of his head. He also like falls backwards onto a bed of nails. Like he gets bonked on the head by a bowling ball. There's a girl as well. I don't remember all the exacts of what happens to her. I think she gets hit with bowling balls, maybe a cinder block or something like that. And then Santa finally shows up and finishes her off. The daughter actually kills the guy. Santa kills the girl, which is absolutely bonkers to me. That girl seemed innocent enough, and she doesn't seem like traumatized at the end of it, which is weird. She still has like that like childlike wonder surrounding Santa and just the whole situation. And then at the end, there's a face-off between Santa and Scrooge. They have a fight. Santa gets mortally wounded, but he uses he does this thing to go up the chimney, and he does it while holding on to the guy, and just, I don't know what it is, but Santa just turns into like fairy dust and goes up. But the guy stays a guy, and Santa like pulls him through the chimney and like tears off all of his limbs and his head. And it's like it's brutal. It's like something out of like Mortal Kombat, like the fatalities or whatever. It was crazy. And I'm like, that doesn't really make sense, like given the rules of the world. But I don't care. It was insane. And if you're into that sort of thing, man, you absolutely pop off. The thing that really got me, though, is I'm less interested in the actual, like, I don't know, like how the violence is done. That's not really my thing. My thing is more so about how do they handle the mythos of Santa. That's something that I find interesting, the way that characters like this evolve in our culture over time. And for the most part, Santa is one of those characters that's been around for so long. He's undergone so many incarnations in terms of how people interpret who he is and what he does, that seeing someone do something new with it is very interesting. I'll be brief about it, maybe expand on them later in another video. But the way that they handle Santa is that he has these powers, but he doesn't really know how or why they work. He just knows that he has them and that they work. And he almost seems like an average Joe who was just kind of handed powers without any sort of like manual or rule book, which is probably what actually happened, if I'm, having to guess. Violent Night feels very much like a one-off thing where they're just not really going to do anything like this again. But if they did, I would love a prequel to show how Santa became Santa and show how he got his powers. He is married to Mrs. Claus, and their relationship seems pretty solid. She brings him his original sledgehammer thing from when he wasn't Santa. Too little, too late. Everyone's already dead by that point. But I will say that I'm not a huge fan of like the drunk scenes in the beginning. I think that with movies like this, where they're trying to be more adult, trying to take something kiddish like a Santa movie and make it adult, having him be like a raging alcoholic is just like, I don't know, it's like writing for adults 101, right? There's no creativity to it. Like, people have been making kid show or movie characters into drunks pretty much since kids shows and movies existed. Like, that's not really subverting expectations anymore, and it's not really that interesting. I think it would be more interesting if he was curmudgeon, but he didn't have like an alcohol problem. He just, had a violent streak as a result of it, which to a certain extent is true in the movie. The rampant alcoholism feels a lot more like self-medicating because he feels like no one believes in him anymore, and he feels like he's not as important as he used to be. Nobody needs him anymore because everyone just buys gifts for their kids, right? But this girl proves to him that he's still necessary and that people still need him. So, he decides that this is what he needs to do, and he goes off and he saves the family, and, Christmas is saved, yada, yada. I think that the fact that he doesn't understand his powers is a very interesting thing. I think that the fact that he doesn't really get how everything works, and the fact that he is just kind of like going with the flow, I think is an interesting interpretation of Santa as a character and as a creature almost. The Santa Claus with Tim Allen is kind of like the definitive Santa thing, at least for, my generation and the people roughly the same age as me. We kind of use that as our template for how we understand the Santa lore, because it did a lot to kind of cement the rules. Whereas this movie kind of does the opposite. There are not really very many clearly established rules. And there's no one that knows the rules, because even Santa doesn't understand how everything works. He's just doing things because he knows that he's done it before and it's worked. And, it's to the point where right after the climax where Santa's done fighting, he actually dies. And through everyone believing in him, he's brought back to life. How? How does that work? He doesn't understand it. Nobody understands it. And to a certain extent, it really helps with the suspension of disbelief, because if they're not trying to explain it, then, you can kind of just be like, oh, well, I guess it just works. I mean, Santa doesn't know how it works. How am I supposed to expect to know how it works myself, right? It does a good job of doing that. Additionally, I think that the little girl character was great. She did a good job of really kind of cutting through a lot of the, vulgarity of the movie. Because Santa's still trying to, have kid gloves on when dealing with her. He doesn't let her say, bad words or whatever, even though the other characters in the movie are saying them constantly, often around her. So you have this interesting dichotomy of the extremely vulgar violence that the movie is going for, and then this kid who everyone, well, mostly Santa and the mom and the dad, are still trying to treat like a kid. And it's interesting, and it helps to make the scenes where she does things that aren't characteristic of a kid in movies like this hit harder. When she kills somebody, that hits like a freight train, let me tell you. You just don't see that coming. You just expect Santa to come in and take care of it for her, but he doesn't until the end. And she actually gets a kill off. She has a kill count in this movie. And arguably an assist with the other girl, but Santa was the one that actually put her lights out. And all in all, the thing that really got me about this movie was the way it handled the Santa mythology and the questions it didn't bother answering. I think that I would have had more to say about it if they did more with explaining the actual transition of him going from being this barbarian skull crusher to being Santa. And maybe they'll do that in a future movie. I doubt it. I don't know how well this movie did, and I don't know how interested the people behind it are in creating a sequel. But, that being said, I will say the actor who played the girl was really good. David Harbour was good, as always. This movie, he really just played Hopper from Stranger Things, except he's Santa. So I like Hopper. He's like one of the best characters in Stranger Things, so I can appreciate this movie a lot just based off of that. If you don't like David Harbour, or you've never taken the time to get invested in David Harbour as an actor, or if you don't really think Christmas movies are worth your time, I don't know how much enjoyment you'll get out of this, because part of the enjoyment is the fact that it feels almost like parts of this movie are still trying to be a traditional Santa story with extreme violence and swearing sprinkled in, just kind of to spice things up a bit. I think I still would say I give this a pretty hearty thumbs up. Um, Big recommendation, especially if you're a David Harbour fan. And yeah, definitely check it out. Maybe you can check it out once it hits streaming. Definitely recommend. If it's still in theaters, go check it out in theaters.